if that's a promise, I've seen that not always work out. Because I've seen people raised the right way and then they mess up. So obviously this verse isn't true. And so let's think about that just a little bit. So I'll offer this. We should read this not as an automatic. It's not as an automatic sort of a thing. Don't read it that way. Or you shouldn't read it as a guarantee. And you might say, well, wait a minute. It sounds like a promise from God. And what I'm saying is exactly that. I'm saying, I think that would be a misunderstanding of how you're reading the Proverbs and understanding them. This is not where God is saying, if you do this, this will always happen, promise, guarantee. That's not how you're to read this. What we need to understand is this proverb is a declaration of the way things work, okay? And it's the same idea that when you do this, this is the outcome, and this is generally how things go. And so that's how we're supposed to read Proverbs 22:6 this is wisdom literature, and this is a thoughtful statement about how things go. So what Solomon is saying here is that when you invest the work and you train up a child in the right way, the way that he should go, the way that is established for him, when he's old, he'll stay in that path. So what he's saying is that what you invest in the child will produce fruit as an adult. That's the basic principle here. So is that basically true? And I would say the argument is, yes, it is the way things work. And that's the whole premise that I've been trying to get at in this study, which is the whole idea of formation and the twin that goes with that, habituation. Because that's the kind of stuff that is in mind here. Form a child in the way he should go. When he's old, he will not depart from it. So you teach a child the right kind of habits. You teach them the right kind of behavior. You teach them the right kind of character. That character becomes built into them, and then it establishes itself later on. It will reassert itself. It's the way that it works. So you train up a child in the way he should go. When he's old, he will not depart from it. That's the confidence we have in the value of the work we do and the investment we make. And I've been trying to stress this all along, that what we need to do is invest hard, especially when people are malleable. But even as they get older, you can still learn, you can still establish, you can still habituate, you can still work on new ways of doing things by practicing these things. And that's what Luther's also a part of. What's fascinating to me is pretty much all of culture has always known this. You know, the idea of training and habituation and formation, and that these things become instilled in you. And so you teach a child good study habits when he's a kid, and then those carry through. You teach a child a certain kind of work ethic, and when he's young, he learns this, and that carries through. That's what we're getting at here. And we're talking about the way that virtue works and character works. So we should not see this as an automatic or a guarantee per se. Rather, we should see it as a reassuring fact. And so this is the kind of confidence you can have, that when you invest and you work hard and do this work, it's not going to return empty. Now, is there always the wild card factor in here? And this is what we need to take into account, that we always have human accountability, and the sense that a person can do what they want to do, and it's possible for somebody to reject what is given to them and what is good. Yes, that can happen. We know that. We know that. People are still sinful. Adam messed up. Eve messed up. Judas messed up. And who was forming Judas? Well, Jesus was. And so we need to take that seriously. And yet, the reality is, we still know that the formation is not without effect. And so rather than saying, oh, well, look, you never know for sure how it's going to turn out, so why bother? That's exactly the wrong way to think about it, okay? It's not like you say, well, Adam didn't work out and Judas didn't work out, so it's not going to happen anyway. No, what you do is you say, well, wait a minute. The promise is here. This is the way things work, that when you invest, it works out. You still have the wild card factor, but it doesn't negate what you do. In fact, it makes you work all the harder to try to deal with the reality of the sinful person who can still rebel. And you work even harder at investing so you can work to try to counteract that tendency that we have to do our own thing. And so that's the thing I would say we need to understand here is people are sinful, humans are that, and so we need to work even harder at saying, how do we deal with that? So you see, there's an undercurrent in all I'm talking about here. I'm suggesting that one of the ways that we deal with this human propensity to sin and do our own thing and to rebel, we deal with that not just by reminding people of how much God loves them and pouring on more gospel. We do that but we also pour on good training and good formation to help counteract that sinful human tendency. Both things need to be at work here. And that's kind of an important concept that Lutherans sometimes struggle with, because we're really big on the forgiveness of sins, gospel people, and then things will take care of themselves. And I'm basically saying there's truth to what the gospel does in our lives. There's no doubt. It transforms us, makes us new creatures. But the old sinful stuff still hangs on. And if we're going to take him seriously, we need to take him seriously and work hard at forming people into the right paths so that those become part of their nature and how they do things. And I believe that's exactly what we see Luther teaching. Luther's not denying the power of the gospel, but he is also recognizing fully the power of human sin and the need to deal with it. And that's what Proverbs 22:6 is telling us. So work hard. Proverbs 22:6 is emphasizing the investment on our part. Do your thing. Do your work. Work hard at the formation and the habituation, and it will yield results. That's what he's saying. All right. So, what comfort does this bring? Nothing. Right. Okay. I think the comfort, well, anybody? John? Yeah, there's hope. And you see, and this is not to be lost. I think the comfort can come on a couple of levels here. One is when you're doing the hard work of trying to help a child learn the right behavior, and they're having a hard time, they're being resistant, and it's a battle. And that could be when they're 2 years old. It could be when they're 15 years old. Each age has its own unique challenges. And as kids get older, they get wiser and craftier about what they do, but you're still working on the formation. And so you can become discouraged sometimes thinking it's not getting through. I'm not making any headway. And so it's encouraging to realize, no, this is making headway. I'm going to keep at this because this is what God has called me to do. So there's comfort there when you're in the middle of it. There's also comfort when you're dealing with that situation where maybe you did the hard work and now you're seeing somebody who is off doing their thing and not paying attention and not doing what God would have them do. And that's where you say, I'm going to keep praying, keep doing what I can do, and count on the work that was established and that formation that was done, and pray that God brings that to fruition yet. And I'll give you a scriptural example of this. So you've got the story of the prodigal son, all right? We don't know much about the story of his upbringing. We don't know what it was like, but we know the prodigal son grew up in a home where his father loved him, and then he decides, I'm going to go do my own thing. And he does. And so is the dad happy about that? No. But off he goes. And we won't get into all the details of the parenting there, but the point is this, that when the prodigal comes to the end of his rope and things crash, where does he go? He goes home, and he's brought back there. That formation wasn't lost on him. And I think we see this kind of story playing out other times. We'll see a child who grows up maybe in the faith and in the church, and then for whatever reason, they wander from that truth. And then as they get older, often they'll think, you know, my life is kind of a mess, and I'm not sure what's going on. What's real? What's true? And then they go back to those things that they knew were real and true and right. And I believe this is exactly what the Proverbs is talking about, is those tracks that are laid down, those paths that become worn as a child are always there. And even if they get overgrown, running with the analogy, what happens when you get older is you kind of go looking for them and you rediscover them, and there they are waiting for you. And when you get on them again, it's like, this is where it needs to be. This is what's right. This ties in again one more time with the whole liturgy thing we've been talking about and the ways of worshiping. See, a lot of you have a certain idea about this is the way it should feel. You know, worship is like this. Well, where'd you get these ideas? Most of the time, it's what was built into you as a kid. You were habituated into thinking, this is what church is like. This is what church should feel like. This is how it should be, because this is what I was habituated into. And then, when you get older, often you are thinking, I'm looking for this right thing that church should be. And what you're looking for are these tracks that are built into you, this habituation. And when you find it, it's like, right, there it is. And see, that's why I believe it's really important that when we're training children, we're paying attention to the habituation, the tracks we're laying down. It's part of good catechesis. So catechesis isn't just putting ideas in heads, like, now you got the Apostles' Creed memorized? Great, we're all set now. No, there's more to it. It's the whole habituation, the practice, the way I worship, the way I sing, what church feels like. You're teaching them and you're putting down tracks. You're doing this. You see, the reality is you're always doing this when you raise a kid. No matter what, you're always forming them. So that's the key, kind of the huge lesson here of 22:6 is, train a child in the way he should go. When he's old, he will not depart from it. All it's doing is it's articulating the reality of formation, that habituation is always going on. And so you are always forming a child. And that's where the challenge comes in. Because formation is always happening. Always. For good or ill. And so if you're teaching a child that he can do his own thing and that, you know, getting your work done on time doesn't matter, and that if you don't do your job, I'll just step in and do it for you. If that's what your child is learning, is that being habituated into him? Yes, it is. And so you see, parenting matters a lot because of what we're habituating becomes part of how they function, part of how they see the world, part of how the world works. And this formation is always going on. And see, it even goes on as an adult. This is why it matters, you know, what kind of TV shows you watch and what kind of websites you visit and kind of people you hang out with. Does that impact how you think about the world? Absolutely does. Absolutely does. And you don't have the idea that, no, I'm in charge of all those things. No, you're not. Why do you think advertising works? Why do you think corporations spend billions on advertising? They wouldn't do it if it didn't work. And so the advertising happens because it becomes habituated into you. You think, oh, I hate that commercial. But you remember it. And you remember the name of the company, and when it comes time to choosing products, the thing that you've heard is habituated into you, whether you want it to be or not. See, formation is always going on, and you are naive if you think, no, I'm in charge of it. No, you're not. It doesn't work that way. You are being formed by what goes on around you and through you and what you're participating in. The culture is always forming us. And see, this gets into deep, heavy sociological stuff, but it's really important. We don't live immune from the culture in which we inhabit. It's always making an impact. So see, this formation is always going on. So what challenge does this verse bring? The challenge is you better be smart and be proactive about the formation going on. And if nothing else, that's the plea I'm trying to make is be smart and proactive about the formation you're doing. Don't let it just happen. And I guess the frustration I have when it comes to so many parents I see in action is they don't have a plan. They don't think about it. They're just reactive. They're always, this happens, and they're trying to figure out what to do with this, and they're trying to react to this or react to this, and they're taking their cues from the world. You know, everybody else is doing this, so we should too. The phenomena of kids who are so busy, they don't have time to be with their family. Where did this come from? Who thought that was a great idea? But everybody's doing it. And so we have kids who go to school all day, and then they go to these activities after school, and then they have events on the weekend. Then they're involved in traveling sports teams that take them away for 4 or 5 weekends a year. And this is all a good idea, somebody thinks. But we're all doing it, and we're investing time and money to do this. Who thought this was a great idea? Why do we do this? Is that the kind of formation we want to do? Are you forming kids the right way with this stuff, or do we just do it by default? You see, we need to be proactive and smart and ask ourselves the question again. Wait a minute. What's the goal here? What do I want to accomplish in raising children? And I remember I gave you way back when a twofold goal. What was it? I want them to follow Christ. I want them to be right with God. And what's my other goal? I want them to have character. I want them to be a decent kid. I want them to be a decent person when they grow up. That's my twofold goal. I think is a pretty good set of goals. All right? I want them to know Christ. I want them to live their life well and have character. If that's the goal, if that's the twofold goal, how do I get there? Formation, 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 formation. And so you see, when you just take your cues from the world, are you thinking about what goal that you're achieving? And so many times, the things we actually do with our kids is working toward a goal we don't even have. It's so weird.
Unfortunately, many children after confirmation leave.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
I'm wondering if there's anything being done at the SIM to try some way we could relate to them so that they can get the message across.
All right.
Exactly what you're saying has to be done.
Yeah.
But what can we do so that these kids might want to say, gee, I'd like to keep going?
Well, this is a great question. So the observation is being made that confirmands sometimes don't keep on coming to church.
Too many of them.
Yeah, okay, I'm just being nice, okay. So we confirm kids and then they kind of disappear. And so the question is, what's being done at the seminary to help address this? And so, yeah, we've got the solution. The seminary has all the answers. I'm not sure that that's the case. But I will answer I'll delve into this because you're asking a really loaded question with lots of layers. But it is all relevant here. But I see a hand over here, so I'm going to go with that. Then I'll come back and pick you up. Yes?
I was going to help respond to that.
Good.
Because I've been thinking about this question issue also. And something that even Pastor Nick pointed out on this topic is this family showing that it's important?
All right.
Is part of, are the parents showing up outside of confirmation and showing that this is valuable outside of just checking this box?
All right.
What is this overall family showing?
Good. So the observation being made is, what is the family doing to help confirm or reinforce what is happening on the church's education? And if a child is being, well, I'll just give the worst case scenario. So the kid gets dropped off at church on Wednesday night for the catechesis, then they go home and mom and dad are like, oh, have you gotten your homework done? Did you memorize your stuff? Great, okay. But they have no more investment than that. Then the message the parents are giving is, this is perfunctory, no big deal. So what does the kid really learn? It's perfunctory, no big deal. And he might go through confirmation, but if there's no buy-in from the family, it's not going to happen. So let me finish up my next 2 points, and I'll still yet answer this fully. The two most significant forces for shaping character should be home and church. And so what is already being called very clearly is, these should be working together. And why are home and church so important for this shaping of character? Because of the formation. Who's got the most amount of time available to form a kid? It's mom and dad. But see, that presumes that mom and dad are actually spending time with the kids. Because if mom and dad are farming the kids out to daycare, who's actually doing the formation? Yeah, the daycare is. And you've heard the stories about the toddler who is getting picked up by mom and dad and doesn't want to go because they'd rather stay at the daycare giver. Because they have a stronger bond. Why? Because daycare is investing in me. And I spend 8 hours a day, 10 hours, 12 hours a day sometimes with that person. And mom and dad, I don't know who they are. They just feed me once in a while and take me off to McDonald's and we do fun stuff. But who's really forming me? And you see, that stings, but it's true. So home and church are the key thing here. And home and church need to be in conjunction with this. There's nothing that can happen at church that can overcome a lousy negative home situation. So if the home is basically saying, church is not a big deal, we go when it works, what's the kid learning? Church is no big deal. So they go to church once a month, maybe twice a month, and they're really great attenders. That's become standard of good attendance now, is twice a month. That's considered outstanding attendance by any metric. Yeah. You look at any pollsters, any metric, if you're going to church twice a month, you are active. That's considered awesome. Okay? But so they go once a month, we go to church. We're not just Christers, and it's not just Christmas and Easter, we go. And so, but they go when it works. What's the message being given? The child's being formed by that. So then they come to catechesis, and the teacher says, you should go to church every Sunday. Okay, they learn that. They write it down on the test, go to church every Sunday. That's the third commandment. Great, got that. But what are they learning? They don't believe that. They know that what mom and dad are doing is what they're learning. And for a child to overcome the family is outrageous. That's even more rare than the kid who's raised right, who then drops off the deep end. And so I will say that I think a lot of the problems we have in catechesis happening, where kids getting confirmed and then disappearing, a lot of that has to do with there's not a continuity between home and church. That's a huge issue, no doubt about it. So home and church have to be in union. Then the second level is the church actually catechizing and forming kids, or are we just doing data dump and giving them a bunch of ideas? You know, if we just see catechesis is they need to know these truths, and there we've accomplished that, they passed the test, that's not formation. That's not being habituated in the life of the church. If you want to think seriously about formation and confirmation, we need to kind of rethink the whole point of the church. This is big deal stuff, guys. And yeah, I have nothing less than that as my agenda. I want the church to rethink all of this stuff. So, we'll get into this since you brought up confirmation. We need to make a clear distinction between confirmation and catechesis. They are not the same. And we talk a lot of times about going to confirmation class, but that's frankly wrong. Confirmation is nothing more than a ritual that happens in the church for kids of a certain age. And what are they doing? They are confirming the faith they were given at their baptism. That's all it is. That's all it is. You will not read about confirmation in the Bible. You will not read about confirmation in the catechism. Luther didn't even do it in his day. Okay? It's not like this great ritual that we should do. It's not a sacrament. So the ritual of confirmation came in, and it's got a really murky history. In a sense, it was an attempt to try to give us a little Lutheran bar mitzvah. It's kind of what it was. You know, we need to have a little coming of age ceremony, and so let's do this. And so that's kind of where confirmation came from. And so the best spin on confirmation is the child was baptized as an infant. Now they've been growing in their faith, and now it's good for them to stay. I believe what I was given in my baptism, and I'm going to keep on growing in that. That can be a good thing, okay? Now, if confirmation, though, happens in the spring of the 8th grade year, after a little bit of school time, and we put them in robes, and we march them up to the front of the church and do a little ritual, and then they go home and have a party, and we say, now, this is not graduation. They say, oh, okay, it just smells like graduation, but it's not. We're not helping things much. And if everybody just goes through it because it's what you do, we're not helping things very much. So I'll be real blunt and say I'm not a huge fan of confirmation. I'm a huge fan of catechesis. Love catechesis. When does catechesis start? 7th grade? No. 6th grade? No. When does catechesis start? When you're born. When does catechesis end? When you get confirmed? No. When you die. So catechesis is a lifelong process. You are always learning, being catechized in the faith. That's why you come to Sunday morning Bible class, to get catechized. That's why you go to Bible classes during the middle of the week. It's not just for the fellowship time, although that's not insignificant. It's to be catechized, to grow, to be formed, habituated. So if we're going to do a really robust catechesis in the church, we need to do whole life. That's nothing short of that. And yes, in answer to your question, at the seminary, are we trying to address this stuff? Yes, we are. We have a class that gets taught in the practical department on confirmation and catechesis and how to address some of these things. And the prof who's teaching that now, Peter Nafsker, is doing a great job. He's doing it the way I would do it. That's why it's a great job. And he developed these same things when he was in the parish, and they're right on the same track of things how I would operate. So it's got memory work, but it's got family activities. It's got stuff for all ages, and it's a robust program. It's not just a program, it's a way of thinking about what we're trying to do here. And see, the goal here is not to get kids confirmed, so there, check that box. The goal is to get them discipled so they follow Christ. That's the goal. Totally different objective. And so that's the whole point. But see, too many of our parishioners and too many of our pastors still have this idea of check box. Baptized, check. Confirmed, check. Married at church, check. No. It's a whole life of being discipled into the life of the faith. And we've got to overcome a lot of lousy assumptions about a lot of this stuff. So there's a hard, long answer to a very good question. Yep.
Well, it's interesting you talk about, I'm going to borrow a word, catechesis. I talked to my coworker, she likes watching murder mysteries and get into the psychology about it. And we were talking and say, in a way, the world is catechizing the children right now.
Yeah, oh yeah.
They're already teaching them how to, they teach them via drag shows, and they get younger and younger and younger.
Oh no, there's,
And
yeah.
it's amazing. People are kind of shocked by it. I'm like, they're doing this in broad daylight right now.
Oh, yeah. No, the formation is always going on, and the world is very deliberate about it and very good about it. It's not necessarily always a conspiracy that it's all worked out, but there's a demonic element to it. And if you want to talk about a demonic conspiracy, I'll buy that. Absolutely. And so if that's what's going on in the world, and the world is actively forming our young people, what are we doing in the church and in our homes to make sure we're not letting that formation stick? We've got an uphill battle. We don't have a neutral culture around us, which is just kind of like take it or leave it. No, we have a culture around us actively working to undo the very things we're trying to accomplish. Because the goal in our culture is everybody has a right to believe whatever they want to believe, and there's lots of ways to live a meaningful life. There's lots of truth, and there's nothing that really is worth dying for. That's what our culture is teaching. And is that what we believe? We don't believe any of that. And so are we willing to just kind of let our kids get exposed and formed by the culture and then try to fix it in our lives? No, it's got to be deliberate, proactive, intentional. That's what I'm trying to get at here. If we're going to do formation right, it's got to be deliberate, intentional, proactive. We've got to get hard working at it as a church and as homes. So there has to be a home church buy-in. The fidelity of these two, the home and the church, matters far more than anything else that they're going to encounter out there in the world. So in other words, you're not going to, you're not going to teach good character by relying on the world to take care of it for you. That's what I'm trying to get at. It's not going to happen because the world is going to form people according to their standard. And their standard of good character means tolerant, pluralism is great, everybody can do their own thing. That's the kind of stuff we got going on out there. All right. Final thoughts, questions here on this? Yes?
Just quick on you mentioned the bar mitzvah kind of influence.
Yeah.
And everything. I just wonder, our heritage was to be pretty isolated, in terms, is it more agrarian or something that made the kids with culmination age?
Yeah, see, there's so many cultures, just about every culture has some sort of coming of age ritual. There's any culture has this. It's to mark the difference between childhood and adulthood. And so that's part of it. And so confirmation has been likened to that. I think that's probably accurate. And so, like I said, the origins of confirmation are murky. You can find them going back, different things, and there are different factors and different motivators. So what I'm saying is, if we've got this ritual, this habit, what can we do with it? Can we use it in a good way? I think we can, but we've got to be careful because it can also become a really bad thing. So
Associated with, for a lot of people, the most insecure bad memories in their whole life was when they were 13 and 14 years old. So
true.
why do you want to associate?
Well, I agree. Ages 13 and 14 for most kids are kind of a tumultuous time. You're dealing with puberty, you're dealing with peers, you're doing all that kind of stuff, and now we're going to dump on this important spiritual experience as well, which is why there are many, and I'm probably one of them also, who would be in favor of pushing confirmation back further. And see, the other thing that has to happen in here, we haven't talked about this at all, is you absolutely should dissociate First Communion from confirmation. They're two different things altogether. Confirmation has got virtually nothing to do with taking communion. And we've made this connection, get confirmation and take communion. No, confirmation, if you want to tie it to a sacrament, is tied to baptism, not to Holy Communion. So confirmation is confirming your baptism. That's what we're confirming, okay? And so that's the right way to think about that. And so First Communion should happen sometime when the kid's young, as far as I'm concerned. And my rule would basically, when a child can take the Lord's Supper without giggling, they're ready. That's kind of how I look at it. And so I'm ready for First Communion to be pretty young. I would put it down probably 3rd, 4th grade, maybe even younger. It depends on the kid. That's where I'm coming from on First Communion. All right, so I think that should be very early, but I think confirmation probably should be later so that the kid has a chance to grow up a little bit and actually know what's going on and now confirms his faith with some confidence. So somewhere in high school probably be a good idea for that, in my opinion. There's lots of ways you can approach this. One of the things I tried in the parish was we didn't do the group confirmation anymore. We got rid of it. And so we treated confirmation like we did baptism. You got confirmed one at a time when a kid was ready. And I had a list of hoops they had to jump through to show they're ready for confirmation. And some of it was just hoop jumping, I'll admit it. I wanted them to show that they were invested and ready to do this. And so we would do confirmations one at a time when a kid was in high school sometime. And that's how we did it. There was not a lot of buy-in initially. Congregation was somewhat less than thrilled with my great idea. We'll put it that way. What? We're not having what I had? No, we're not. Oh, but anyway, we did it. And we worked hard at it. And it got pretty well established and was going right along. So then when I left and came back to the SEM to do my grad work, a couple years later, it went back to the old way. In my congregation, they just reverted back. I was shocked. Hurt, crushed to the core. No. But it didn't surprise me. But see, old ways die hard. But there are better ways to do these things. We just need to dig in and work at it. All right. Other thing I'll just say before I forget this, because it's kind of funny, but confirmation, we know is really important because you're confirming your faith. But often I'll see people talk about, I have to go to confirmation class, okay? And it always, it's one of my pet peeves. No, it's not conformation, it's confirmation. But I've come to change my mind on this. I think conformation is just fine. I'm conforming you to the way of Christ. And so we're going to conform you here in this class. So I'm all over conformation class because we're going to teach you conformity to the way of Christ. I'm fine with that. All right. Anything else on this discussion?
So, in order to beat this dead horse,
Oh, we haven't even started. I can beat this horse a lot more.
so is confirmation kind of a Catholic idea that just kind of lingered?
Yeah, again, I would have to do my homework and give you a full blast, real answer to tell you where it all came from. In Rome, they do confirmation, and only a bishop can do it, so it's kind of a special big deal. Grow where it starts and the roots of it, I'd have to dig in a little bit more and find out. But yeah, it's been around for a long time, and I really think the biggest thing is the pietists would say this was an effort to try to make up for the fact that you don't have a kid making a decision. And so we're doing that. So you got that strain in there. But you also have the strain in there of the sense of the bar mitzvah, coming of age thing. That's a part of it, too. There are a lot of factors that play into this. All right, yes?
That short period of time when your church did confirmation a little bit differently,
Yeah.
was there data that showed that the kids stayed with church a bit longer?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what really motivated me to make that change was I was tired of confirming kids and then having them become church discipline issues a few years later because they're not in church. And so I thought, let's quit confirming them if they're not really ready. And so let's make sure we're confirming kids who want to be. And so did it have an impact? Yeah, but see, I'm not going to attribute it just to that change in confirmation because that congregation, frankly, was doing many things right. We had a day school attached to the congregation, which was pre-K through 12, and that day school was very much in sync with the congregation. And that day school was very much deliberate, intentional about home has to be with us. And we had a lot of policies that made it difficult for parents to just dump a kid at school. And one of the policies was both parents have to be active in church. And so we made this kind of decision. It was hard. So in other words, I wouldn't be able to say this solved the problem. There were a lot of things going on there that I think helped. But yeah, that congregation, I think, did a nice job of making disciples. One of the things I can point to is that a lot of kids who graduated from our high school and who were confirmed in the church, and frankly, confirmation class, like 98% were in our school. That's how it was. And so the kids who were confirmed and graduated, tons of them went on into full-time church work, which to me is it's not, there's your everything, but there's something going on when kids get that and are, doing that. So, yeah, I think it can work. It's not easy, and, challenges are there, but to me, it's worth it. Yep.
There's been a lot, I imagine, there's been research, but I mean, have they interviewed kids about why they fell away from the church?
Oh, yeah, lots of people have done research on that, tons.
So what is...
Yeah. Well, there's the most recent one is You Lost Me, was a study that was done about 10 years ago by a guy named Kinnaman. And he did all this research and, why people fall away and why young people aren't interested. And a big part of it is the duplicity, the hypocrisy. And that's probably my single greatest criteria, especially this goes with home and with church, is when you have the standard lines being told, but then people aren't living it. The duplicity, and that's what most of the people cite. They'll talk about the hypocrisy and they don't agree with my values and that kind of nonsense. But really, the big driver is the lack of integrity. And this is where parenting goes south all the time. When mom and dad say, "You do this, kid," and then the kid watches mom and dad not do the very thing. You're done. Forget it. It doesn't matter what you say. If mom and dad aren't living what they say, it will not ever make any formation. It won't. I mean, that sounds like you're just slamming the door shut, but yeah, I'm pretty much slamming the door shut because I just seen it all the time. You can't undo the lousy example of a parent who's not following through on what they're saying because the kid realizes it doesn't matter. And that goes back to my little indicator I gave you. I know I mentioned this before, that Marva Dawn has said, and she's a Lutheran writer who's written a lot about the power of formation, habituation, and why it matters, especially with worship and the kind of tracks being laid down. But her rule of thumb is you can predict whether a child will remain in the faith, not by when they get confirmed or how serious they are about it, but you can predict whether a child will stay in the faith simply by asking one question. Does that kid's father sing in church? And I think she's exactly right. Because dads who sing in church, the kids realize, oh, this matters. Dad's invested. And when a dad sits in church with his mouth shut, even though he says, I believe all this is really important, and he doesn't sing, what are his kids learning from dad? He's not invested. And if he says, but my voice is terrible, the kids, it doesn't matter. The kids just know he's not willing to sing. He's not willing to embarrass himself. He's not willing to put himself out there for the sake of this. I am absolutely convinced this is dead on, right on the money. This is exactly right. See, the father is the one who sets the standard example. And there are tons of stats on this. Mom and dad both go to church. What matters the most in the longevity of kids in the faith is what dad does. So if dad stays home and mom goes faithfully, it won't have the impact. If mom blows it off and the dad goes, it makes an impact. The dad sets the tone. Critically important. And you can say it's sexist, I don't care. It's the way it is. It's just the facts that the way they are. The dad has that kind of influence. So when the dad goes to church, I go to church every Sunday, but he sits there like a bump. He is telling his kids it doesn't matter. And that's what the kids learn. Huge. I tell the story, but it really hits home. I had taught this to a group of men years ago. And one of the guys in the group, all these young guys there. And then weeks later, one of the guys in the class said, hey, you should see what Frank's doing over there now. He's got 2 little boys, and he's got a horrible voice, but he now sings at the top of his lungs in church all the time because he paid attention to what you said. Exactly. That's what I'm talking about. You see, it doesn't matter if your voice is lousy. You sing because this is what you're here for, and you believe what you're saying. You sing. It matters. And I'm talking about liturgy and hymns. You participate. You got to invest. And if you don't sing, you're not invested. You know I'm saying is true. You go to the ball game, and you sit there in the 7th inning stretch, and everybody's standing up, and they're going to sing, taking me out to the ball game. Then you get the guy who's sitting there and doesn't do it. What's everybody think? What's wrong with him? Doesn't he understand? This is baseball. This is your job to stand up and sing the 7th inning stretch. This is your job as a spectator. You don't sit there and drink your beer during the 7th inning stretch. Shame on you. You all know this, right? Right? Because the guy who just sits there isn't a real fan. He's not invested. We all know this. So why would you go to church and just sit there? You're not really invested, are you? You see, it's not spiritual, powerful insight. This is just how it works. We all know it. Why don't we practice it? We all know it. All right. I told you this horse is still kicking. He's not even close to dead. We got to beat this thing a whole lot more. I could go on for hours on this stuff because I have literally spent decades thinking about this stuff and writing about it. All right. Other thoughts here or any final things? Yes.
I was just going to say, singing is one thing, but participation, right? I mean, a lot of people come to church as a ritual, and the ritual is not bad, but if you don't participate, I try to say this to my kids, and they don't know your name. If you go to church at a church, and I walk and visit, and no one knows your name, you obviously aren't participating.
That's a good marker.
Similar to school. Like if you went to school and never participated, you wouldn't learn much.
That's exactly right. You're invested, you're part of it, it's your life. Your life is built around it. See, the vision I have for the church and home is home and church are working in this beautiful symbiosis, this cooperation, and the home is built around the church is built around the home. We work together. And so the kids living in that kind of world, we go to church when it's church. Wednesdays in Lent and Advent, we go to church on every Sunday. It's just what we do. You can't miss. You go on vacation, you find somewhere to go to church. Of course you do. It's what we do. Because it's part of life. It's who you are. You're totally invested in it. Just like you're invested in school. It's exactly right. It's exactly right. Yep, that's it.
I'm just going to throw this out there for families. There's a book called Habits of the Household.
Okay.
It's about how to incorporate
Okay. Who's publishing that? Do you know? Probably on the book card. Okay. So, habits of the household. Here's a concrete way of putting this into action if you're feeling overwhelmed. Actually, study 4, which we're going to get to, is going to actually get into this a little bit also. We're going to start talking about some of these concrete things. But yes, there are resources. That's a good one. There's a book by CPH on the Proverbs by a former student of mine named David Coe, who's teaching at Concordia, Nebraska now. And that's a really good resource. He goes through all the Proverbs and breaks them down into like different categories and helps you kind of dig into the Proverbs more. So those are ways of doing this. You know, the Bible reading time of just, you know, reading the Bible together. Those are parts of these things. So yeah, habits are critical. And seeing the family and the church together, that's what we're going for here. Exactly right. It's not like there's a set formula that what you have to do it all the same way, but you need to do what you're doing. And that's the key thing. Choose good things and then do them. Conformation. All right, saw another hand come and go somewhere over this way, I thought. Yeah, Jack.
Is there any statistics on people doing daily home devotions with their kids?
Yeah, I'm sure there are. I don't have them on top of my head. But the daily home devotions, how does that make an impact? Absolutely, yes. And that's part of the habits of the household. So a daily devotion, prayers at mealtime, you know, invoking God throughout the day. You bet. Yes.
You don't need a survey. All you need to do is ask Concordia Publishing House how many devotions do they sell and what are they sold for. 90% of them are sold for gifts and there aren't many sold, period. So obviously that's an area that somebody, and maybe it's the church itself, since somebody has to tell them to do it.
Yeah, so the church, the pastors, we need to take leadership and say we need to be doing these things, and then maybe CPH would sell some stuff if people are looking for resources, because yeah, you're looking, and anybody who does devotions knows the challenge of trying to find good resources, and you're right. So we need to be emphasizing these things more and more and more, and not just talking about them, but practicing them and demonstrating them. And so that's where books like Habits of the Household or other like small groups talking about this and learning the actual skills. How do you structure your day? And see, these things get into hard decisions. Well, if I'm going to have a daily devotion, maybe my kid can't go to cello practice anymore. You know, maybe he can't. And so do I have to make a choice between the cello and, you know, catechesis? Maybe I do. And see, and that gets hard. And I'm picking cello intentionally instead of picking on softball or volleyball or something. But we need to make careful choices about what is really important here. Yeah. All right, so maybe you do have a future all-star Major League Baseball player, and you have a responsibility to cultivate that skill. Great, but you have other responsibilities too.
Maybe you'd take an hour to do in-home.
No, I probably wouldn't, because kids can't handle it.
There's no excuse not to take 5 or 10 minutes.
The best devotions are the ones.
Portals of prayer is a simple thing to do.
Yep. Portals of prayer, my devotions, there's just tons of stuff out there that's good. Tons of stuff.
You make them quit doing baseball or something they want to do this.
No, I agree.
Backward effect.
No, that could be true. But see, I'm talking about a formation that happens from the time the child is little. And so you're making choices even when the kid's 3 and 4 years old of what activities are going to be involved in. And when they start getting older, you know, are school sports enough, or do we need to do select on top of it? You know, those are the kind of choices I'm talking about. I'm not talking about having a kid who you can't play outside because you have to learn your Bible. No, that would be counterproductive. I agree completely. Formation is a whole life thing. You're forming the entire child. All of character matters. All right, excellent. Now we're out of time. Lovely. All right, so study 4. Let's just jump into it real quick because I want to. All right. So, in this study, what I want to talk about are some of the concrete specifics. We've been getting into some of the theory a lot about formation, character, habituation, and so I want to talk about some of the concrete things I'm looking for, and one of the key words here is this word, virtue. Virtue is an interesting word. In Greek, it has its own word, obviously. It's a ancient word. So arete is the Greek word. And so in English it would look like this. Oops, I'm sorry, I made it. Whoops. Okay. I'll get this right. So there we go. So I'll make an R instead of a rho. So arete. So arete is the Greek word for virtue. But this can also mean something like excellence, okay? And so it can be a little bit, vague in how we think about it. But what is a virtue? What do we mean by a virtue? And we use this word sometimes like there's a very virtuous person, and sometimes we think about, someone who's got high moral standards or something. And that's really not what we're thinking about. What virtue is, virtue are skills, habits, and dispositions. So in other words, ways of thinking and acting. Skills, habits, and dispositions that enable and conform to a standard. So that's what a virtue is. So a virtue is a skill, a habit, a disposition that enables and conforms you to achieve some standard. So you could talk about a virtue in bowling, okay? So a virtue in bowling is I know how to get that spin just right on the ball so it tracks down to that nice little arc and hits from the side and knocks down 10 pins 98% of the time. Or maybe 95, whatever. And there's your stats. And what's the virtue? The virtue is, how to hang on to the ball, how to let go of it. And there's virtues that go with bowling. And then there's also the virtue of how to, talk about how great you are when you bowl a good game, and how to act with your peers, the virtues. Or you can talk about a virtue of just good character. So the question, of course, then is the standard. What's the standard we're looking for? Virtues are as innumerable as there are standards. So a virtue is not like set, here it is, but we need to think about what's the goal we're shooting for. Then the virtues are these skills, these ways of operating, these dispositions that enable that goal to happen. That's what a virtue is. Is that making sense? Okay? Now, historically, there are 7 cardinal virtues. And these go way back in history, not in a Christian way, but even back to the ancient Greeks. Aristotle is the guy who really spent a lot of time thinking about this. And the reason Aristotle thought about this so much is because he was very interested in what does it mean to be human? And what makes a human a human? And he said, well, what's that got to do with anything? It has everything to do with it. Because the whole point is, if a human is supposed to be this, then that's the goal. That's to tell us. A human should be that. And whatever that is, that becomes the goal. That's what a good human looks like. That's the telos. And so then, for Aristotle, once you've got the telos figured out, then the virtues are the skills, the habits, the dispositions that enable you to get to that telos, that goal. All right? So if your goal of the perfect human is exquisite beauty and the poise, then you're going to do whatever it takes to make that happen. So you're going to, we'll do plastic surgery, we'll do whatever it takes, because that's the telos. We've got to make it happen. So you got to figure out what the goal is, what the objective is, and then you figure out what the virtues are that help you get there. So Aristotle thought hard. He realized what makes a human is careful, rational thought, and a person who is fully engaged with himself and has himself under control. He's in control of his passions, and he lives rightly in society, fulfilling his duties and caring for others in the proper way. This is the fullness of humanity. And so he saw 4 cardinal virtues that made that happen. So I'll make the list of them, then we'll start talking about them next week. So the 4 cardinal virtues, and I know I got 7 here, I'll take care of that later, but Aristotle gave us 4 cardinal virtues. So what are they? The first one is prudence. The second one is justice. The third cardinal virtue is courage. And then the last one on the list, cardinal virtue, is temperance. So these are the 4 cardinal virtues as Aristotle thought about them. And he said, if you have these virtues at work in your life, you will then be rightly aimed to achieve the telos of full humanity the way we should understand full humanity. That's how Aristotle thought about it. So these are the 4 cardinal virtues: prudence, justice, courage, and temperance. And they grew out of his understanding of the human living in relationship in this polis. And I'm using that word polis here, and polis is the word we get political from that. Polis in Greek simply means city-state, or even better, community. So in other words, society, people around me. So people around me function well, benefit well when I'm practicing prudence, justice, courage, and temperance. Okay? I've got 1 minute. So prudence is basically foresight, being aware, having a plan, knowing what's going on. Tuned in is a pretty good word for this. Prudence is not meaning morally hung up, like we use, oh, he's such a prude. You know, that's not what we're talking about. Prudence is aware, sharp. This is a little bit like always be prepared, Boy Scout motto. That's the kind of prudence we're talking about. So you're aware, tuned in. Justice means giving to each person what is his due. So justice is I treat people the way they need to be treated. Courage is having the control over your own fears to do what you need to do, even when it's difficult. And then temperance is being the master of your passions, your own impulses, hunger, sexual desire, anger, whatever the passions you feel inside. Temperance means I'm in control of those. I run them, they don't run me. So those are the 4 cardinal virtues. So we'll unpack those more next week, and I'll add the last 3 on the list to give us our 7. Let's close with a word of prayer. Lord God, you've called us to be your people, and you've given us work to do as following you, to speak your truth to those around us, and to help make sure that we conform ourselves and others to follow you. Give us diligence in that work. Give us joy in that work so that we claim your promises to be active in our lives and to bring your plans to fruition. Help us to be faithful in our day as we carry out that work. Guide us and direct us in this week. We pray it in Christ. Amen. Blessings on your week, gang.